Okay, Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Kesubos Daf Dalet, Kesubos 4. So we're going to start on the very bottom of Gimel Amud Beis on 3b, where the Gemara has citing a brisa that it said earlier in the brisa that you're supposed to get married on a Wednesday, but that's in a circumstance where everything goes normal. But if it was the time of the Higamon assaulting the women, they would get married on Tuesday. And then they say, Machmas Ones, on account of extenuating circumstances, they had the practice to get married also on a Monday, custom to get married on a Monday. So the Gemara asks, what is these extenuating circumstances where they can get married on a Monday? So the first suggestion was where the general came to town on a Tuesday, and so therefore they moved it up to a Monday. We're on the bottom of 3b, 3 lines from the bottom. So the Gemara says, well, alternative version of it is, what does it mean, machmas ha'ones? What does it mean on account of the extenuating circumstances they allow them to get married even on a Monday? Keditanya, what's the extenuating circumstances? Harei shahaya pito afoy. Let's say his bread is baked, v'tabacho tavuach, and the meat is slaughtered, and the yeno mazug, and the wine was poured, meaning to say they prepared the wine. Umeis aviv shachas, and Rahman son, the father of the groom, dies. The father of the groom, Rashi says specifically, because he's involved in preparing for the wedding. O ima shakal, or the mother of the bride dies. Then machnisin as a meis l'cheder. Then we take the dead body, we bring them into a side room, because what are we going to do? We have to bury the man, but at the same time, we have all the money put out for the wedding. Weddings aren't cheap. They weren't cheap then; they're not cheap now. They'll probably never be cheap. So you have to put the body in a side room, and then you bring the bride and the groom to the chuppah. The top of 4a, we're at top of 4a. And then they engage in consummating the marriage. Then they separate from each other, and then they bury the dead body. At that point, they bury the dead body. And so Rashi explains, once they bury the dead body, then the laws of the Sheva brachos kick in, and the Shiva, it's like a festival for them, and we postpone the Shiva till after the festival. They observe the 7 days of celebrating, seven feasting days. And afterwards, they observe the laws of the mourning. But since in those days, even though they were allowed to have that initial encounter, nevertheless, we say at the same time that their desires for each other is fully strong, and so we don't trust that they are going to be able to withstand themselves and hold themselves back for this period of time where they're not allowed to be together. Even though later on that's actually going to be the practice, as the Gemara says in Nida 65b, that's going to be the practice for every bride and groom. But for now, the sages say that we have him sleep. He sleeps amongst the men, and she sleeps amongst the women to prevent them from further intercourse. And even though a mourner is not supposed to put on makeup, in this case, since she's a new bride, we allow her to do the makeup on herself for 30 days of mourning. And specifically, we allow this scenario in a case where it's the father of the groom or the mother of the bride, because under these scenarios we specifically allow it because they're still involved in the preparation of the wedding. Because there's nobody else who's going to be involved in the wedding. But the opposite, it would be an opposite scenario. Well, we wouldn't allow that. Why? Because if it's the opposite scenario, we would say in the opposite scenario that they should just go. I guess they would say, in the opposite scenario, they would be able to delay it because they wouldn't be able to repeat it without this scenario. Today we say everybody's involved, so it's not as much as a situation. In those cases, you couldn't delay it. In those cases, you wouldn't be able to delay it. You wouldn't be able to delay it. So if it would be anybody other than the father of the groom and the mother of the bride, they would bury the body in sit shiva. I'm a Rafram Bar Papa. You might, yes, Jeffrey has a question. Yeah, well, Jeff's saying, well, isn't the whole reason why you're doing it because you don't want to lose the value of the wedding? No, because it's irreplaceable, because nobody would know how to do it other than them. Today, we would say it's anybody would do. And today we would say it's any of the relatives. Yeah, but today it's such a big expense. I guess right. Yeah, but you could replace it. Somebody else could do the makeup for her. So yeah, it does a good point that Jeff is raising. But anyway, so the Gemara says, I'm a Rav from Bar Papa. We just saw him and we did a siyum for Yevamos. Rav from Bar Papa says the name of Chisda Lo Shanu Al Shanasa Mayim Al Gabi Basar. When do we say this scenario? When you put that you could delay the wedding, when you put the water on top of the meat already. And once you put the meat into the water, you can't exactly refreeze it at that point. But if you didn't put the water on the meat, Mizdabim, stop, just sell it. And I'm a Ravo Bikrach, and if we'll be in a city, even if though you put the meat in the water, Mizdabim, you could still sell it. You go down to Machane Yehuda and you sell the meat. So the Gemara says, I'm a Rava Bikrach, well, we just said that. I'm a Rav Papa Ubikfar, and if it's a village, even though you didn't put the water on the meat, because in the village nobody's going to buy your steaks. The Gemara says, so what's the scenario which Rav Chisda is referring to? Amravash, could go Mata Mechasias, like the city of Mata Mechasias. The Mavka Mikrach or Mavka Mikfar, that it's not a city and it's not a village, meaning it's in between. And the folks can say that today we're considered like this type of city, that you can't really sell. Like if the caterer makes a big feast, you're not going to be able to sell it. They're going to have to give it away. It's going to be a total loss at that point. So the Gemara says, Tanya Kavasi Rav Chisda, we have a brisa that supports Rav Chisda. Harishaya Piso Afuya B'Tavacho Tavuach. If you have the bread that was baked, and the meat that was slaughtered v'yeino mazug, and the wine that was mixed. And the water was on the meat. And so it says, under those circumstances, it says the water was on the meat. That's the key line here. The water was on the meat. And then the father dies of the groom or the mother of the bride. And this is exactly the same source we had. If the meat was on the water already, that's when we do this scenario. And all of those days, the man sleeps amongst the men and the women sleeps amongst the women, and that's what we do all of those 7 days. And also somebody whose wife, and we'll see, the Gemara is going to discuss this too, whose wife became a nida, meaning at the chuppah. They showed up at the chuppah, and all of a sudden, because it could be because of the scenario, whatever, the woman got frightened, she became a nida. And so now they're unable to consummate. So this happens today, nowadays also. So then, he has to sleep amongst the men, and she sleeps amongst the women. That they're not allowed to consummate. I studied this Gemara with Rabbi Tendler, Zachrono of Racha, Rabbi Moshe David Tendler. It was a Rebbe of mine, a great rabbi, and he said to me, and he said to the shir, it's not embarrassing. You should publicize. It's a chuppahs nida. I have a bedroom down the hall. We'll put the boy there and put the girl downstairs. There's nothing to be embarrassed about if this scenario occurs. And everybody thought that was a little strange, but that was what he said. This is the halacha. You have the chuppah, but then they're not allowed to be together. Vein monin tachshitim min hakal kol yom, and you're not allowed to, and you don't have to withhold the makeup from the dry for 30 days. And now the Brisa continues, and either scenarios, you're not allowed to have the initial confirmation on Erev Shabbos, not on Friday, and Lo B'motei Shabbos, not on Saturday night. We're going to see why you can't have the initial confirmation on Friday night or on Saturday night. The Gemara is going to discuss both. So now we analyze the statement. Amar Mar, Hu Yashem Bein Anashim, Hi Yashena Bein Anashim. He sleeps amongst the men, and she sleeps amongst the women. Why? Messiah Rabbi Yochanan. Isn't this a support for a statement that Rabbi Yochanan made, who said, even though they said there's no mourning on Chol Moed, but the words of the practices that are in Sinna, what are the practices in Sinna? This is the practice. The practices in private that you do have the practice that you do. So how is this a Messiah? That which we said you're not allowed to have. Rashi says that which we said you're not allowed to have consummate the marriage for the whole day, the whole 7 days of the wedding, because it's like a festival. So it means to say that's because you're observing it in private. So that's like the mourning in private. Shotzina. Nobody else knows what you're doing in your bedroom. So those are the things that you do in private. But so we see that even though there are times where you don't observe the morning, like this Sheva Brachos and on festival, the morning is still observed in private. So another example of this, every morning is like this on Shabbos. Every time Shabbos comes, you don't observe laws of Shiva in public on Shabbos, but in private. You're not allowed, a husband and wife are not allowed to consummate their marriage on that night. Dorosh of Yosef Parade the Rava Mishmei the Rava Loshna Loshanu Eloshalobal Avobal Ishto Yeshana Imo. When do we say that there? So he says, when do we say this idea? So when do we say this idea that they're not allowed to be together? When do we say this? Only under a scenario where they never consummated. That's where we say this idea that they're not allowed to have yichud together with each other. So where they never consummated it. But if they consummated it, he was able to continue to live with her, and and they don't have to separate where he goes to the men and she goes to the women. The Gemara said, we don't understand this statement that Rav Yosef says in the name of Rav Yosef, the son of Rava, says in the name of Rava. By the way, we don't understand it because our whole scenario is where they did consummate. But we say specifically in this scenario that he sleeps amongst the men and she sleeps amongst the women. So it doesn't make any sense. And the Gemara says, Kika Amar, when Rav Yosef, the son of Rava, says the statement, is a pirsa ishto nida. That when Rava says that when we say they have to separate, that's only in a scenario where she became a nida. But that's only where they've never been together. That because a nida is so strict, so therefore the husband is believed that he's not going to continue to be with her, because ironically, because nida is such a strict penalty of kares, whereas the mourning is the rabbinic prohibition, and so therefore it's going to be less severe. So therefore we force them to separate. It says it says, and so too about the woman who who became the nida, which implies that it refers to all the laws of mourning are compared to it. So it says on the top of 4b, Hachikamer. This is what it means. And so too, a woman who became a nida and the husband did not have relations with her, then on a nida period, he has to sleep amongst the men and she has to sleep amongst the women. So the Gemara says, so we see from here that the sages are stricter by the laws of mourning than they are by the laws of nida, because by the laws of mourning, they say they always have to separate after their initial act. But by the nida, they say if they had their initial act together, they're allowed to stay together. Yeah, we don't make them separate. So what's the reason for that? So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yitzchak, Amar, and we already explained why Rashi said this is the case. Rashi already gave us the answer to that. Rashi said because since the nida is stricter, it's a more severe penalty. We're certain that they're going to be able to withhold themselves more than the mourning, which is only rabbinic. All the laws of mourning, according to most commentaries, are rabbinic, except for the first day. The first day is biblical, but all the other laws are rabbinic. So the Gemara says, how can you say the laws of mourning are stricter than nida? That any activity that a woman generally does for her husband during a nida woman can also do for her husband. With respect to nida, if a woman does certain activities for her husband, she's allowed to continue to do them for her husband, with the exception of meziga sakos, vatzos amita, v'archatzos panav yadav v'ragav. A woman, when she's a nida, can continue to do all these things for her husband, except for she's not allowed to pour the cup of wine for him, because that's too intimate. A woman who's not your wife is allowed to pour a cup of wine for you. But if your wife is a nida, she's not allowed to pour the cup of wine for you, because then it's an intimate act. Or hatzas amita, she's not allowed to make your bed. A woman who's not your wife can make your bed for you. Like you could have, let's say, a housekeeper can make your bed. But if your wife is a nida, she's not supposed to make your bed for you. It's too intimate. If your wife, if she's a nida, she's not allowed to wash your face or your legs. By morning period, we see so even though a man is not allowed to force his wife during the morning period to put on her makeup, pocheles is like the eyeliner, and pokeses is to basically put some kind of facial on, some makeup on her face. But they said but she is allowed to do these activities which are prohibited in the nida, which is what? To pour his wine, to wash his face, and to pour his legs. Here, don't put it on the film because the film is so holy. So put it on the plates. Put it on the plates. Whatever. So we see. Yeah, good job. So we see that the laws are actually more lenient than nida. So why do we say you're allowed to you live in the same house after nida, but not after mourning? So the Gemara says, "Lo kasha." The Gemara says this is not a difficulty. Why is this not a difficulty? So the two sources are referring to two separate scenarios. He's the one who's mourning, and one is where she's the one who's mourning. What does that mean? Look at Rashi. Rashi says, really mourning is more lenient than the laws of the nida. And this is how we explain our brisa. That which we said earlier, he sleeps amongst the men and she sleeps amongst the women. That is where a scenario where he is the one who's mourning. And now where it says that she can pour the cup of wine for him, that's where she's the one who's mourning. And because it says he can't force her. So we see it's her mourning period. And what's the reason why? What's the reason why we, generally speaking, don't allow anybody, a mourner, to pour the cup of wine for her husband? That's because if he's the one who's mourning, he's going to desire to be with her. But if she's the one who's mourning, we allow it because she's going to say, "I don't want to be with you." She's not going to be interested. You understand that the wife is more likely to say, "We're not going to engage in intercourse because I'm in mourning," whereas the man would be willing to do it. That's what the Talmud is basically saying. So therefore, the cup of wine she could pour for him if she's in mourning, but not if he's in mourning. That's the rabbi's understanding. So anyway, we can put it out to a Twitter poll to see if people agree with us or not. So if we agree with the rabbis or not. So that's how we explain the difference. Where says it can't be. It says that in the scenario where they make him sleep amongst the men and her sleep amongst the women, it says if either one's in the mourning period, if it's the father of the groom or the mother of the bride. No, the Gemara says kikotani ashara. No, when we say that it refers to she's the one in mourning versus he's the one in mourning, that the Mishnah is referring to the rest of the laws, meaning to say aside from that, aside from they always sleep in separate places during this week of the Sheva Brachos after the funeral. But if she's the one who's in mourning, she could pour the wine for him. If he's the one in mourning, he can't pour the wine. She can't pour the wine. Gemara says, do we really draw a distinction with what's allowed between whether or not she's the one who's mourning or he's the one who's in mourning? But didn't we learn in the Brisa? Let's say somebody's father-in-law, or mother-in-law died. Excuse me. He can't force his wife to put on the makeup. But rather, he turns over his bed. This was a sign of mourning in those days. Today we cover the mirrors. It's kind of the same thing. It's to limit our splendor. We turn over the bed. And he observes the laws of mourning with her. So we see from here that even when she's in mourning, he's supposed to he's supposed to observe the laws of mourning with her. And so too, if her mother-in-law or father-in-law dies, she's not allowed to put on makeup. Our family does so. She turns over his bed and observes the laws of mourning from here with him. So we see from here from the fact that it doesn't say that in his mourning period he sleeps amongst the men. We see from here that the Talmud is not drawing a distinction between the man and the woman's mourning. So the Gemara says, talking about velos today, so you read it. So the Gemara says, no, amend the text. You have to add into the Brisa that amongst his mourning, he sleeps amongst the men and she sleeps amongst the women. So add that in. The Gemara says, but it says, and so too, that it's the same like the man, just so like the women. The Gemara says, no, that's only referring to the makeup. That she doesn't put on the makeup, whether he's the one who's in the morning or she's the one who's in the morning. But it says she observes the laws of mourning with him. So it's supposed to be the same. So the Gemara says, doesn't it mean that when she's the one who's in mourning, when he's the one who's in mourning, she gets to stay in the same house with him? The Gemara says, no, in the same bed with him. The Gemara says, no, imo babayis. It means that she gets to be in the same house. Like Rav said to Chia, his son, Rav had an uncle, Rabbi Chia, who he's very close to, until he named his son after him, apparently. Rav said to Chia's son, that when you're in the presence of your wife, you should observe the laws of mourning. This was the practice in time of the Talmud. It's no longer our custom today. Today, you're not supposed to do it. But in those days, when you're in the presence of your wife, and she was in mourning, you were supposed to observe the mourning. But when you're not in front of her, then you shouldn't observe the laws of mourning. So we see from here that there wasn't that you're observing the laws of mourning not as the laws of mourning, but really as the laws of honor. And so therefore, when it says no hegesimo, then when it says in that Brisa that no hegesimo avelos, it doesn't mean it means she just observes the custom. But when she's not with him, she doesn't need to observe the laws of mourning. So, but anyway, the Gemara returns to its initial question. And on one hand, it looks like the laws of mourning are more lenient than Nida. And that's why they say that by that, and for this reason, she's not allowed to even live in the same house with her because they view laws of mourning as less severe. And on the other hand, he looks at Nida as less severe because during the Nida period, she's not even allowed to pour. She's not allowed to pour the wine for him. So how do we deal with this? So earlier the Gemara said we draw a distinction between whether he's the one who's in mourning or she's the one who's in mourning. But now the Gemara gives a different answer. Rashi says, "Mika medames avelos tahacha avelos ta'amar." Are you going to compare the mourning of a groom to the mourning of somebody who's not a groom? Avelusa ta'alma chamir. The laws of mourning in general, somebody who's not a groom, he's going to be more severe and he's not going to treat them lightly. But in this case, by the groom, he's going to say, look, the rabbis let me get married. They were lenient with me. So therefore, so they're going to come to, God forbid, they might come to not observe the laws of mourning. And so therefore, they're going to, we have to be stricter and not allow him to pour the cup of wine. Mar says, my kua, what's the leniency that they observed here? If you want to say, well, they allowed them to have the relations and then separate, and that's not a leniency. Why do they allow them to have the relations? The relations are prohibited during the week of Avelos, because Avelos hasn't started. And you were Rabbi Lazar, the Shiva doesn't start either according to Rabbi Lazar until they leave the house, or according to Rabbi Yeshua until you close the grave. No, the leniency is they say first observe the laws of Sheva Brachos for a week, and then the laws of Shiva. So now, okay, we'll stop here and we'll pick this up. Okay, I just want to say a schedule note, very important scheduling note.